The following evening, Fraser arrived at the entrance to the San Clemente University in Sheila's car. As he watched hordes of young, excited faces pouring out of the building, he felt nostalgic. He'd enjoyed his 4 years studying there. They had been 4 of the happiest years of his life, especially the last 2 when he had met Natalia. He felt for her the moment he saw her, and there was no turning back or looking at another woman since. Fraser waited for over 20 minutes before a beautiful young girl exited the front door. She had a long ponytail and wore a yellow dress and an elegant white coat. Heads turned as she walked. Fraser got out of the car and waved to her. She was Natalia's younger sister, Lynn, and they were strikingly similar in appearance. "Where's Natalia?" she asked as she got into the car without any form of greeting. She flung her bag onto the back seat. "I thought she was picking me up." "She's gone straight to the restaurant from work," he replied, used to her dismissive attitude toward him. He got into the driver's seat and started the engine. "What's my sister still doing with a low-life scumbag like you?" she asked, glaring at him as he drove out of the parking lot. He smiled, refusing to rise to the bait. Her continual mocking of him no longer upset him. Natalia had chosen a European restaurant for dinner that evening. It was her favorite, and Fraser had booked a private dining room for their meal. It was a short drive from the university to the restaurant, and neither spoke until they reached their destination. Lynn rushed ahead before Fraser had even finished parking the car. She quickly found the private room where Natalia and Sheila were waiting for her. "Finally," said Natalia, pleased to see her sister. "I've been waiting for ages for you." A loud bang prevented Lynn from replying. A passing waiter had accidentally bumped into Lynn, spilling an entire glass of red wine onto her white coat. Even Natalia had a few spots on her dress. "I'm so sorry," said the waiter, his face crimson with embarrassment. He pulled a tissue out of his pocket and offered it to her, hoping it might soak up some of the wine. "It's okay. You didn't mean it," said Natalia, as she also took a tissue out of her purse to help mop up the mess. "What is it?" asked the manager, running over when he noticed the fuss. He saw the red wine on Lynn's coat and turned to the waiter. "What have you done?" he asked angrily. "It's okay. It was an accident," said Natalia, frightened that the waiter would lose his job. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the waiter said again. "Don't worry," said Natalia. "You're not to blame." "I'm sorry, sir," said the waiter while bowing down to his manager's direction. "I hope you'll forgive us," said the manager. "May I offer you a few complimentary side dishes as a token of our apology?" "Of course, that would be very kind," said Natalia, smiling graciously at him. Another waiter appeared at the door. "Sir, there's someone looking for you," he said before whispering something in the manager's ear. The manager looked embarrassed. "Oh, sorry. I have something to attend to, so I won't disturb you any longer." He nodded and turned to leave. As they watched the manager leave, Natalia continued to wipe Lynn's dress. She had barely finished before the first waiter appeared again, this time holding a tray. It contained several dishes, including lobster and caviar, as well as an expensive-looking bottle of red wine. Fraser arrived after parking the car, and they all sat down and started to eat. Another waiter came with another tray of food, much to Lynn's delight. "Wow," said Sheila. "I'm going to bump into a waiter every time I come here." She hadn't paid attention as the waiter had closed the door behind him. The manager was peeping over the waiter's shoulder with a cruel smile. As the door closed, the manager returned to the kitchen. Krina McKinsey was waiting for him. "Miss McKinsey, are you pleased with what I've done?" he asked her. "Well done," she said, before she returned to the office and sat down. Fraser looked at the array of dishes in front of him, but his appetite had deserted him. He felt that something wasn't quite right. Do you know the manager? He asked Natalia. No, but one of his staff did ruin Lynn's dress, she replied. I think they've made amends in a fair manner, she added, indicating the spread before them and instantly stuffing some caviar into her mouth. It's just that there are some really expensive dishes on the table, he said. Glancing around, he noticed no one was listening to him. This is a Michelin star restaurant, he added. This food would cost way more than Lynn's dress. Lynn glared at him. Stop it, Fraser, said Natalia. She was very protective of her sister. Maybe it's their policy. He gave up. He knew that Natalia and Lynn weren't going to listen to him. Watching how Sheila had already begun digging into their feast, he decided to join them instead. Barely a morsel of food was left by the time they had finished. Natalia called for the bill, which the waiter brought very promptly. A little too promptly, thought Fraser. If you have a loyalty card, there's a 20% discount, he said as he handed her the small piece of paper. Krina stood outside the door, waiting for the fireworks to begin. Natalia took the bill off the waiter and unfolded it. I think you've given us the wrong bill, she said as she handed it back to him. We haven't eaten that much. Her hands were shaking as she returned the paper to him. What's the matter? Asked Lynn, noticing the look on her sister's face. She snatched the bill from the waiter and looked shocked upon reading the final amount. Her eyes widened in surprise. How much? Sheila's jaw dropped when she heard the amount. It's a joke, she said, quickly recovering her composure. Very funny, she said sarcastically to the waiter. There are 4 of you, and you picked the most expensive dishes on the menu, said the waiter calmly. You picked our finest lobster, caviar, escargot, and more. Don't forget the bottle of red wine you chose, which costs hundreds of dollars alone. No, you're wrong, said Sheila bluntly. The manager gave us that, remember? Yes, agreed Natalia. Could you call him over? There's been a misunderstanding. The words were barely out of her mouth when the manager walked into the room, a little too quickly for Fraser's liking. Is there a problem? He asked brightly. Yes, said Natalia, standing up. We didn't order these dishes. What do you mean? He asked, the smile on his face vanishing. Have you eaten someone else's meal? No, said Sheila, her temper beginning to get the better of her. You gave us these dishes as a peace offering because your waiter ruined Lynn's dress. But now you're trying to charge us for them. That's right, said the manager innocently. I did offer you some side dishes, he added, emphasizing the word side. Sheila glanced at the small salad dishes on the table. The joke's over, said Lynn. Stop messing with us. I don't know what you're talking about, said the manager smoothly. Are you forcing us to pay for all this? Demanded Natalia, her face turning ugly. Are you accusing me of forcing this food on you? Asked the manager, his tone becoming much frostier. If you don't pay, I'll call the police. You deliberately tricked us, argued Sheila. I'm not paying you a single cent until I've spoken to the person in charge. I am the person in charge, said the manager. He glowered at her. Actually, I'm the person in charge here, said a voice from the doorway. Krina walked in, enjoying making an entrance. She smiled graciously. I get it now, said Natalia. It's you. Miss Mackenzie, they're refusing to pay the bill, said the manager, pretending to complain. Why? She asked Natalia. Don't you have enough money? Security, she shouted. If you don't pay up, I'm afraid you won't be able to leave, she added as 3 security guards rushed in. The 3 women looked at one another. Several other diners had gathered at the door, causing Lynn's face to blush with embarrassment. What What should we do? She said, looking at Natalia. Natalia didn't answer. Her mind was whirring as she tried to decide. Although she had some savings, it was nowhere near enough to pay the bill. Even if she ran all her credit cards up to their limits, it still wouldn't cover the amount. She sighed and opened her purse. Fraser had watched the whole affair quietly, not impressed with how quickly Natalia had caved. He walked over to Krina. "Miss Mackenzie," he said politely, "is this how you do business?" "Who are you to teach me how to do business?" Krina replied sharply. "Don't be rude to me. Pay your bill and get lost." The crowd of people at the doorway was beginning to grow. A young man pushed through the crowd and into the room, causing Fraser to smile. Fraser poured himself another glass of the expensive red wine, took a large sip, and looked right into Krina's eyes. "I'll pay the bill," he said to Krina, "but you'll refuse to accept my money." Natalia looked at Fraser in surprise. "Are you crazy?" she whispered to him. "You've only just earned that money. Don't blow it." "What do you mean?" asked Krina. She stared at him from top to bottom with a disdainful look. "You do realize the size of this bill, don't you?" The young man from the doorway stepped forward, allowing Krina to notice him for the first time. "What's going on?" he asked. Krina smiled. The man was Scott Vieira, and he was her boss. She was looking forward to telling him about how she had secured such a huge commission for his restaurant, and she was convinced that he would back her up in her attempt to get the guests to pay. "These customers are refusing to pay," she said, looking at him. "They ordered dishes they can't afford." Scott looked at the party, his gaze landing on Fraser. "Are you sure they can't afford it?" he asked, turning back to Krina and fighting an urge to punch her. Had she been a man, he would have. "I don't think you recognize this man. Take a closer look," Scott ordered her. Krina looked at Scott, a puzzled expression on her face. "What do you mean?" she asked, confused. She was beginning to feel uncomfortable. "I mean, you're fired," he said, stony-faced. But... Krina was dumbstruck. Scott said nothing. He continued to glare at her. "Scott, are you crazy?" Krina cried, eventually finding her voice. "Do you know who I am? I'm a Mackenzie," she shouted. "Yes, I know," he replied. "I know you think you're from a family of aristocrats, which is why I can't afford to keep you on my payroll." He turned to Fraser and said, "Fraser." But Fraser interrupted him. "Thanks for coming to our rescue like this," he said. "It was a coincidence that I was able to help you recently, but I really appreciate that you've just returned the favor." Scott raised an eyebrow in surprise and confusion. He looked at Fraser's expression and, being quick-witted, immediately guessed what was going on. Scott walked over to him and offered him his hand, saying, "You're welcome. Although I can't believe you're friends with her," he added, nodding towards Sheila. The look on his face made it clear that he didn't like her. Sheila looked at Fraser and Scott in complete shock. How could Fraser Macklemore be friends with Scott Vieira? She thought cynically. She could see that Lynn was having similar thoughts, but Natalia didn't seem surprised at all. Fraser had told her that he saved his life in the past, but that was all she knew. Krina was still irate about her treatment at the hands of Scott. She wasn't prepared to be humiliated in such a way. "Scott, I don't know how you know this good-for-nothing, but I will not be treated like this. You know that our families go way back." "Oh, be quiet," shouted Scott. He had had enough of Krina and her excuses. "Have you forgotten that our families severed all ties a while back? Don't think I don't know what your family has been up to." A stunned silence descended upon the room. Are you sure you want to treat me like this?" asked Krina, determined not to go down without a fight. "I'm sure," he said, glaring at her. Seeing Scott's serious expression and the large number of people staring at her, Krina didn't reply. If she'd known that Fraser and Scott were friends, she would never have dreamed of trying such a stunt. She took a deep breath and nodded, preparing to leave. "Stop. Did I say you could leave the room?" asked Scott. "Pardon?" asked Krina incredulously. "What do you want? I thought you fired me." Scott looked at her, his face impassive. "Fraser, what do you think I should do with her?" he asked. Fraser looked at all the empty dishes on the table and smiled. "I think that since she ordered all these costly dishes, she should pay for them," he said. Krina's eyes opened wide and she said, "What are you talking about?" she demanded. "Do you know who I am? How dare you?" Scott looked at the manager who was still in the room. "Get the credit card machine," he said. The manager ran off to get the machine as Scott turned to the security guards. "Don't let this woman leave until she's settled her debt," he said to them. The guards smiled. Krina had never treated them with much respect in the past. It was a task they were going to enjoy. No one spoke as they waited for the manager to return. Krina glared at Scott. A few minutes earlier, she planned to call the police and have Natalia and her family arrested. Ironically, she was now in danger of being the one who was arrested. The manager returned with the card reader. Krina dug her card out of her pocket and slapped it on the machine in frustration. Scott smiled as the machine beeped, letting everyone in the room know she had just spent a fortune on a meal for 4 people she hated. "Thank you, Miss McKenzie," said Scott. "Now you may leave." Krina left, flanked by the security guards. She didn't utter another word while walking out in utter embarrassment. "Fraser, is there anything you'd like to tell me?" asked Natalia suspiciously. "You know, about you and Scott?" Fraser looked at her, wondering how to explain, but Scott beat him to it. He laughed and rolled his eyes. "Didn't he tell you?" he asked. "It was years ago when we were at college. Fraser and I went camping and I accidentally fell into an abandoned mine shaft. If Fraser hadn't pulled me out and carried me home, I would have died." Fraser smiled, thinking what a great screenwriter Scott might have been if he hadn't become a businessman instead. "Oh, I see," said Natalia. "He hadn't told me the details," she added, looking doubtful. She was sure that if Fraser really had saved Scott in the past, he would have bragged about it several times. Sheila, however, was much more impressed. Coupled with his handling of the affair with Krina, he was gaining merit points with her. They chatted with Scott for a few minutes longer before they left the restaurant, unaware that they were being watched by a gloomy-looking young person. Once they had left the parking lot, this young person dug out his cell phone and made a call. "I've sent you the money," he said once the call was answered. "You should make your move now. Make sure you get it right. If you do, I'll make it worth your while." There was a pause before a deep voice replied. "I understand," he said. "Just wait 2 days, okay?" As the car sped away from the restaurant, Fraser began to notice that Natalia, Lynn, and Sheila's opinions of him had risen a little. Sheila even joked with him that she would like him to help her secure a position at the Robster Corporation. Natalia interrupted before he could say anything. "Don't waste your time, Sheila," she said. "By now, the boss will already have forgotten about Fraser." Fraser smiled. "You're right," he said, glad he didn't have to elaborate. The next few days passed without incident. Natalia and Sheila went to work as usual, and Lynn returned to college for the week, planning to come home again for the weekend. Natalia was looking forward to Lynn's return. She left work early, planning to cook her favorite meal in celebration of her return. She set the table and laid all her carefully prepared dishes out on it, waiting for her noisy entrance. She smiled. She missed her sister. Whenever the younger one was home, she filled the house with her exuberant presence. As the dishes began to go cold, Natalia looked at her watch. Lynn was rarely late. She decided to call her and check whether she was okay. There was no reply. When Fraser walked in, he noticed that his wife looked worried. "What's happened?" he asked.
Hey guys, Fraser here. Listen to the full episode of Unraveling the Son-in-Law exclusively on Pocket FM app. Click the link in description to install the app now.